All right, here we are. Breath happening, heart beating, the sound of my voice meeting the drum of your ear. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this happens to be your first time ever listening to this show, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? Thank you to anyone and everyone who's choosing to listen. How's it going? What's your sukha level like? And what I mean by that is, how easeful and receptive are you in the experience of this moment? And no judgments, because there's certainly a lot going on that makes the experience of life feel not all that easeful. And often, we don't have a lot of good models for what it even is to be receptive and receiving. Lots of protections baked into our beings from the time we're born. But I was sitting here thinking about how difficult things are these days, and I know I've been talking about that and sharing some about that here on this show, but not wanting to lead with all of the stuff that I have no say over. And it made me think of, well, what is the stuff that I have say over? And Sthira Sukha is basically it. That's what yoga seems to me to be teaching above all else, is that as a human being, you have an amount of agency in your life. And the efforts that you're making and the behaviors and the attitudes that we hold are reflective of that. And that's reflecting either us having some sensitivity and awareness and facility with that agency that we are born with, or not, or just being trapped in a bunch of unconscious patterning that either was imposed upon us or we've imposed upon ourselves. So seeing if I can find the balance between making the effort to do all the stuff I need to do, but be receptive and easeful equally as much, or to the appropriate degree that I feel okay and things seem to be going in the direction that they need to go. And if you've been around for the last few weeks, you've heard me talking about really questioning that. What is the right direction to be going in? Because the world has really turned upside down in the last few years. And over the last few weeks, there's been a bit of a ongoing theme, I would say, of reflecting on where we're at now, and doing so by also looking back to the trajectory of yoga leading up to the pandemic, and then what's happened over the last couple of years. And my talk today, I really think, is a little bit of a finishing to that kind of series. I didn't really plan it out that way, just sort of happened that way, but my talk today with Bryan Kest really brings it home in a lot of ways for me. I should add that original listeners, people who've been here since day one, and you know who you are, have heard me mention this list that I made. When I started this show, I had a list of yoga teachers that I wanted to talk to. And Bryan Kest was one of those people. And at this point, there are only 2 more people on that list that I've never been able to get: Lilias Folan and Rodney Yee. And believe me, I've tried. So if they happen to be listening, or if anybody listening to this has a line in on either of those 2 people, reach out, help me out. It would help me fulfill one of the primary missions of this show, is to get that list of people. So in any case, I did check off one more of those names with my talk today with Bryan, and it was really great to get to connect with him. He has a new book out called Autobiography of an American Yogi, in which he basically does what I was just talking about. He reflects back on the trajectory of yoga and the role that he played in it, which in my mind is quite significant. If you are not familiar with Bryan Kest, he coined the phrase power yoga. And we talk about that and what he meant by it when he originally started using that phrase and what it came to mean were not the same thing. So it's very interesting to get to hear from him directly on some of the things that happen, some of the signposts that mark some of the shifts and changes that have taken place, and to also hear how he continues to hold it down to this day. So very happy to have had this chance to speak with him and to get to share it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, if you are enjoying what you're getting from this show and you would like to support it and get access to the full-length archives, which is quite extensive, I want to encourage you to become a Podcast Premium subscriber. This show is entirely listener supported. That's why we don't have to have ads for mattresses or supplements or CBD inserted by some corporation's AI tools. The reason we don't have to do that is because listeners choose to support it. For as little as $5 a month, you get access to the full-length archives and you become a supporter. We are very grateful to everybody who's doing that, and I want to encourage others to do the same. If you want to connect with me in ways outside of listening to this show, there's lots of opportunities for us to do that. I have an upcoming event in Austin, Texas, May 4th and 5th, and I would very much love to see you there. Or I've got ongoing live classes online and discussion group. I've got a new on-demand video course that I'm very proud of. You can find all of my stuff, Podcast Premium, and the rest at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that is good. We're going to leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get into this. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Bryan Kest. Hey, Bryan. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Jay. Good to meet you, brother.
I really appreciate you taking up my invitation and giving me this time. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, man.
And just so there's no surprises, I am already recording, so please, let's consider ourselves having just begun, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, man. Anything you'd like.
Well, it's fun for me to get this chance to talk to you. I think I mentioned to you in my email that I did reach out to try to get you on the show almost 10 years ago, back when I first started the show. And just to give us a little bit of context for a conversation today and to kind of clue you into where I'm coming from and talking with you. Back in 2015, when I started this show, I really had sort of two mission statements in mind. Like, one of them was wanting to do some kind of oral history of how yoga came to the West and kind of went from living rooms and church basements to like these big, huge, big money chain, corporate sponsored, investment banker backed thing, it went into the mainstream. And I caught the wave. I started practicing in Manhattan in the early 90s, like 92, 93. And I'm like maybe the generation after you. And I remember it must have been, 2005, 2006, reading an article about you in like a yoga business magazine. And it was about your center. And you had like what I thought of as kind of like a LA vibe. And you were kind of irreverent in a certain way, but very serious still. And it was a bit of a model for me. I was like, oh, see, that was sort of almost like you need like models to go off. It was like a career trajectory for yoga teachers that you kind of were exemplifying. So when I started the show in 2015, I had a list of people, and it wasn't that long of a list, and you were on it. I was like, I was one of the people I want to talk to, but I never got a chance to talk to you till now. It's almost 10 years later now, 8 years or something, 9 years. But it made sense as I was getting ready to talk to you that now's when I am talking to you, because the whole world is so different now compared to when I had first reached out. And I feel like now's maybe the right time. So that's a long-winded introduction to just, again, say thanks for doing this. I guess to get us started, I noticed it said that you opened your center in Los Angeles. Did you grow up in Los Angeles?
No, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan.
I see. And so how did you end up from Detroit to Los Angeles? Did your family move there?
So it wasn't a irreverent LA vibe. It was a irreverent East Coast vibe.
I see. That's probably still same kind of thing. Or again, it was less formal, than like going to India and being at the ashram,
Totally. No, I totally get what you're saying, and I know what you're saying, and I agree. I just, most people are like, "Are you from the East Coast?" Because I think more of the East Coast was more, I think more edgy than LA. That's for sure. Although it doesn't really matter,
Hey, I'm going to agree with you there. I spent the first 18 years of my life in Los Angeles and then moved to New York and then never went back. And I remember I went back at one point. I lived in San Francisco for like 6 months. And I'll never forget, there was like an Indian woman in a coffee shop. And she was saying, at least in New York, I knew where I stood with people. Like if people hated me, I knew. She said, but here everybody smiles and I don't know what's in their hearts.
Yeah, it's a different vibe out. I didn't really have that around me, because truth is, like attracts like, you draw to you that of which you are. So I didn't deal with a lot of that, but there's no doubt, LA definitely has that vibe. New Yorkers, East Coast people, Detroiters, Midwest is very much like the East Coast. It's a little bit more gentle, but still straightforward, where East Coast, it's raw and rough. But, they'll just basically tell you like it is, and it's not like that. They're on the West Coast, they'll piss on your head and tell you it's raining. But having said that, I much rather have the weather out here and the mountains and the liberal mentality that allowed yoga to flourish, because it wasn't flourishing in New York or Detroit initially. Initially it was California. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that. It's like the bee's hive, things are created here. And I guess I had to be here. I didn't really know it, but I was creating something. And I guess this was the place that supported me the most, because this is where I ended up, I don't know if it's in New York, but in the back of every Detroit boy's brain, like growing up, you want to get in your car and drive out to California. Back then, you grow up with California dreaming and the Beach Boys, and you definitely want to come and check it out. And when I got out here, I was like, I'm fucking never going back.
See, it's the grass greener. I was the other way. I grew up there, and I was like, I got to get over to the East Coast.
Totally.
But I heard you say that, and you use these words, and maybe it was some tongue in cheek, but you said that you were forced into yoga and veganism at age 15. Nobody in my family was into yoga at all. How were you forced into yoga and veganism? Were your parents guru? Did they have a guru, or what was the home life situation in Detroit that would have forced you into yoga and veganism at 15?
Well, when I was 13, my father moved to Maui. He left us and he moved to Maui. You should read the book, man, because everything that
I don't have a copy yet. You
could have got it next day on Amazon.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
Anyway,
well, I didn't. You just booked with me. I didn't get a chance to read it, man. I normally would have, but in any case, you're giving us a preview now. You're giving us a preview.
Yeah. I was going to tell you to order it, because when you sent your email, you were actually talking about what you had just talked about initially, like, the beginnings of yoga. And, I go into great detail in the book about the beginnings, like the beginning of power yoga. When I came to LA, there was 3 yoga studios. When now there's 1,049. It was like, or I should say,
Not so much anymore, though. That's
right.
things have changed, but I know what you mean.
Pre-COVID, there was 1,049, and there was the original Bikram studio, the original Iyengar studio, and the first studio maybe in the country, but definitely in LA, the Center for Yoga, who was owned by Ganga White, who heads up the White Lotus Foundation still. Those were the only 3 studios in all of LA, and so I got to watch it grow from there. I watched the manager of the Center for Yoga, where I taught, leave the Center for Yoga and open Yoga Works, which was the first kind of yoga factory, kind of like you said, like the first studio where, there was more of a business vibe.
Well, I went there and took some classes in '94 on this, what was it? Can't remember the name of the street in Santa Monica, but I did take a couple of classes at
that was
Montana Avenue. That's right.
I taught there. I was there.
Oh, you were teaching there at that time? When did you teach there?
I was their first Ashtanga teacher.
Wow, because then eventually Mati became an Ashtanga person herself, right?
Yeah, she wasn't Ashtanga then, but she did, because she married, another Ashtanga person who came into the scene a little later named Chuck.
Right.
And Chuck Miller was an Ashtanga person, and Mati was an Iyengar person. And Mati kind of brought she changed things and brought like Iyengar and Ashtanga together. We called it Ashtangar.
Right.
Because she focused on the alignment of Iyengar, but she was doing the Ashtanga sequences.
Right.
But that was the first, and I mentioned it in the book too, is that, every yoga studio that exists right now actually, in a sense, is an emulation of what Mati created. She created the new yoga studio. Before that, it was, there was a lounge with, chair, soft bean bags on the floor and incense burning.
Right.
And, there was no business vibe at all. I mean, you had to pay for the class, but, there might be a few yoga books and incense to buy, but that was it. And she brought in the clothes, and she brought in the videos, and she brought in she created what every studio has now emulated. So, in a sense, people could, include her in their gratitude meditation.
I think that's true. I think I've had someone on, a student of hers. I never got a chance to speak with her before she passed, but I had someone come on to talk about her, someone who knew her quite well. So we did talk, and I've had a bunch of other people like Max Strom and Rod Stryker and other folks who were around at that time too, talk about this same time that you're referencing. I think you're right. I was in New York, and I think Sharon and David at Jivamukti were doing a similar thing as she was and Chuck was at the same time, in terms of like hybriding and kind of like drawing together different lineage traditions. But you're right. Yoga Works certainly became the model for much of what happened afterwards. I guess I'm curious about how you specifically got into Ashtanga as like your main focus. What was your entrance into Ashtanga practice?
Well, I just, I don't know if it's fate or luck or whatever, but I just happened to be in the first Ashtanga class in the world outside of India. When David Williams brought Ashtanga yoga to the West, he originally opened a class in Encinitas, California. And but then he disbanded that class, and that was the class also where you might know David Swenson.
Right.
David Swenson started in that class, and a couple old school Ashtangis and Tim Miller. But David disbanded that class, and he moved to Maui, and he restarted that class on Maui, and that was the class that I ended up being in, where my father was a surgeon, and he had a really bad back, really a lot of back issues. And he did everything that allopathic medicine offered, and nothing was helping. And someone said you should try yoga. And it just so happens that David Williams was bringing Patabi Joyce to Maui. This is 1978. He was bringing Patabi to Maui, where we happen to be, and I can't remember, but I think he was like giving a class for cripples or something. And my dad was basically a cripple. Like, he could walk and talk, but he was in so much pain. And my dad went to that class. And, he had, as you'll read in the book, he had, minimally speaking, an epiphany. And then he forced me. He was like, then all of a sudden he became like, there was a whole misinterpretation of how you should eat, the vegan stuff and all that. So we all became vegans, and I didn't want to, but he's like, you
all became born again yogis, huh?
Exactly. We became vegans, and we went to yoga class every day. And that was the first Ashtanga class in the world outside of India. And I just was fortunate enough to be in it. It was an amazing beginning. It was a great vibe. And it was a great scene. And it was, he didn't have to force me for long, because there was a point where, I started to notice how it was affecting me. And once I got that, then I never had to be forced again. It probably took about 6 months.
And was that the initial introduction you got to Ashtanga, those classes in Hawaii? And I think I think Danny Paradise was talking about those early classes in Hawaii.
Yeah, he was there with us.
Yes. And I remember him talking about how you really had to like commit. Like, you weren't allowed to just like drop in. It wasn't like some yoga fest in Bali. You had to like commit and show up every day, or you weren't allowed to come or something like that. Do you remember there being like a high bar of entry?
David was tough. You had to pay, first of all, it was very expensive. Very expensive, like more than, it was as much or more than they're charging today for a monthly. And this is 45 years ago. Very expensive. And you had to pay up front. And if you missed one day, you couldn't come back, and you couldn't get any of your money back. So they were very serious. And, and everybody there was serious though. So no one minded it. We were all committed. I didn't mind. I hated it, but because I just didn't even want to be doing it initially. My dad was forcing me, you bring a meat and potatoes boy from Detroit, and you force him to be a vegetarian and tell him to start stretching. And, I was jumping out of my fucking skin, but, all the adults, I was the only kid. All the adults were committed, and so no one minded. And it worked, because it was so confrontational. And back then it was very aggressive too, lot of forcing the body into positions. And
that was going to be my question. Was David teaching, like, I know you actually practiced with Patabi Joyce later. Was he teaching in that kind of very traditional, hard-edged sort of way?
Back then he was. He had an epiphany himself eventually, but back then he was. And so, it was very confrontational. So, the commitment was necessary, because otherwise you'd probably just run. I saw people pay and run. They were like, fuck the money, I'm out of here.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I guess it says here that you did eventually travel to Mysore in like 83. So that's some years later. Was there, I imagine, was there time in between there from the time you were exposed, you were a kid, before like yoga really became more your thing? Did you like rebel against it at some point?
No, I never did, because as I mentioned to you, after 6 months of being forced, it clicked with me. I understood it. I got it. It was more rational than anything I had ever experienced in my life. It made me feel better than anything I experienced in my life. it made more sense than anything I have experienced in my life. It was everything I wanted, because I've always had an innate goal to be the best that I could be. And part of that is being as healthy as I can be. And I never witnessed a vehicle more optimal for that agenda than yoga.
All right. Well, then at some point you start teaching. Well, first of all, what was your experience of Patavi Joys?
Well, it was multifaceted. I mean, India is a dynamic, amazing place, number one. And, I got so much gratitude to him because he got me there, right? Like, there was a point where I wanted to go to the source. I mean, I love David, and, David and Brad were, better teachers than Patavi, but I wanted to smell the smell of yoga, and I wanted to taste the taste of yoga. I wanted to go to the source. So, I wrote Patavi a letter, because what you had to do.
Yeah, back in the day, you wrote the letter and you had to get the letter back to say, okay, you can come, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
I got that, and then me and a buddy, we went there, and when we got there, there was nobody else there. It was just me and him. So, I got also a rare experience with Patavi, because it was just me and him by ourselves. And, and my buddy, who didn't last long, right? Because his body was breaking. I mean, it was aggressive. And he, at one point, he bailed. And, I remember thinking to myself, he's weak. But later I realized he wasn't weak. He was strong. He was smart. And it takes strength to be humble enough to walk away and back off. And he was right. He was right. It was a very unhealthy way to practice. But it was also what I needed, because it fit my mentality. I was an incredibly aggressive person. And I needed someone to look at me and tell me that I was broken and they could fix me, because I thought I was broken, because I grew up in America, and you're born a fucking sinner. And the rest of your life, you're told you're not good enough in every single way. So, I had that mentality, like I wanted to be better. I wanted to be fixed. And Patavi was like, hey, I can fix you, so, it fit my mentality. So I needed to get broken before I realized that was not the right way to do it. It was the absolute wrong way to do it, even though it was the necessary entrance for me. And, and then I went and I spent, a year with him, and it was great. I mean, we went through a lot in that year. I got severely injured. I got hepatitis. I got amoebic dysentery.
That's great. Wait a second. So you say that, and I get it, because I came to yoga feeling broken too. My mom had died and I felt completely broken. And there is a kind of hope hung out by some teachers, or a claim hung out by some teachers that yoga will fix you, which doesn't generally work. But then he was teaching in a somewhat harsh way. Why was that so wonderful in a way? Why do you consider that wonderful? I'm sure you got a lot out of it, and, we try not to look back at our lives with regret, but are you shading over, like, because a lot of people have such mixed feelings about him?
Well, first of all, I have no regrets. It's like I said to you earlier, I had to go through that. In order for me to I came from a culture that taught me no pain, no gain, and more is better. So I found me a teacher who gave me pain and gave me more, right? He's pushing me deep. He's like a football coach. Or he's Bella Caroli, the famous gymnastics teacher. Like, he's that mentality. He's like, go deeper, do more, push harder. Like, that's what I was looking for, because that's all I knew. That's what I thought was appropriate. So he fit my mentality of what I thought was right. And I had to get totally broken in order to realize that wasn't right. But I would have never made that realization without being broken. So, that's why for me, I had to go through that. And now I spend my time trying to prevent people from going through that. If they don't have to, and, I wish I had myself as a teacher when I was young, like to go back and be able to, but I had to go through what I had to go through to learn everything that I learned. And I'm incredibly grateful. And as far as Patabi goes, personally, I mean, again, we had a love-hate relationship, and I had a lot of problems with him. And but I was there to get the yoga. I saw he's someone that I would never want to emulate, I lost a lot of respect for him in a lot of ways, but he had the yoga. So even when I was there at one point, other students started showing up. And at one point there was a rebellion because, of what he was doing with women and all this other shit. And I had to call a big student meeting at where I was staying. And, we all talked about it. And my point of view to everybody was, listen, you guys, this guy's got these, quote unquote, ancient teachings, which I don't really even think he has at this point or another. But
I had people on who would beg to differ, but yes, go ahead.
Well, I can back it up, but whatever. It's, he's got these teachings, and my mentality back then was, let's take the good and leave the rest behind. Let's be a selective sponge.
Right.
Let's be a selective sponge. Let's absorb the yoga, but not all the bullshit that was happening at the periphery. And if you were a girl and you didn't like the way he touched you, all you had to do is, say to him, don't fucking touch me like that. And he never would again. You had to stand up for yourself. So, and if you couldn't do that, then yeah, you shouldn't be there because he would take advantage otherwise. But if I know plenty of girls that were like, they just split. And I know plenty of girls eventually my girlfriend came out to meet me. And, he did something and she was like, get the fuck off me. And he got off her and he never touched her again like that. But you had to stand up. And and I told the girls that were there that. Like, you gotta.
I know, but that's kind of the point, though, that you have to be on guard in that way. But here's what I will say. And I know that at that time, especially, this is even before I got into the scene, in order to have any kind of credibility as a teacher, really, you would study with one of the yoga masters. He was one of the yoga masters. So when you say he had the yoga, if you wanted to go to the source, you would go to study with him, or you'd go to study with Mr. Iyengar, or some people I know found Desikachar, but you went to somebody who had some kind of connection to some kind of lineage or some kind of tradition.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you mentioned Max Strom, he didn't do that,
True.
I mean, you didn't really, I remember when he was a student in my class, way back in the early Yoga Works days, and Shiva Ray, and I don't know if Shiva did that. I certainly know they weren't with Patabi. So I understand what you're saying, but I would disagree. You don't need to go to India, but I definitely wanted to, because I wanted to go to the source. And you could argue that Patabi wasn't the source. It was Krishnamacharya, who was still alive then. So, and I actually went to his shala in Madras, which is now Chennai. So anyways,
I mean, that's crazy. What was that like? How was that?
Well, I didn't get to practice with him there, but it was his studio, and he wasn't there at that time,
right.
But he was alive and teaching. So, I mean, you could go to him too. I mean, the truth, the most powerful yoga I've ever experienced in my life, which is called Vipassana meditation, the whole course is disseminated on video. And it's the most powerful thing I've ever done in my life. So although I recommend going to India, because India itself is friggin' amazing. For any teachers listening, I don't think you need to go to study yoga in India, although it's not a bad thing. I just feel like going to India and experiencing, because when you go to India, you experience what yoga really is, and it's not the poses.
I think that's true. I went for 3 months in 1998, and I traveled around, and I did learn about yoga because it was just like the way the relationship to time was and the way life happened there is more like the world view that yoga comes out of than, like you said, being born and raised in the United States of America in the 80s. We were born into a different culture. I remember my dad had a T-shirt that said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." Like that was that was the mentality. So that's why I kind of went towards Eastern spiritual practices as well. So I fully know what you mean in terms of India just teaching as a place in and of itself. I guess when you come back, when do you start teaching in America, in Los Angeles? Do you start teaching straight Ashtanga as you learned it, or were you hybriding back then like Mati was?
Well, first of all, when you are in India, even in India, 99.999% of all yoga in India is not physical.
Mm-hmm.
I always say physical yoga is an American invention, because when you go to India, you can't find physical yoga. Like back then there was no internet, right? So like if I didn't know where Patabi was because of David Williams, you wouldn't even find, all the yoga is meditation and devotional practices, and that alone is eye-opening, right? Because, we make a big deal out of the physical practice isn't even necessary.
I know, but you created power yoga. So when you were creating power yoga, maybe I will say this. When I first heard that term, it was associated with you. I had Beryl Bender Birch on, and I know she used it too, but she was really taking Ashtanga and like giving it to runners, basically. It was like Ashtanga for runners. But you were doing something different, but it still seemed like it was quite physical and quite powerful. I don't remember it being like seated meditation based so much as like flow based. Am I wrong?
Well, you're right. You're right and wrong, even though, I don't like to use the word
Fair
wrong.
I framed it that way. So fair enough.
But, the thing is that the reason we called it power is because there's nothing on earth more powerful than gentleness. And there's nothing on earth more powerful than humility and gratitude. And every great person, there's not a great person that walked on the planet, from Jesus to Buddha to Mother Teresa to Martin Luther King to Mandela to Gandhi. None of them ever said you need to stick your legs behind your head. They all said the same thing. They all said, try to develop benevolent qualities. Buddha talked about his teaching was moderation. Gandhi, nonviolence, Martin Luther King, equality, Jesus, non-judgment, Mother Teresa, compassion, right? The most powerful things are not anything to do with physical. So I was trying to bring a certain mentality into the physicality. And back then, I wouldn't have, no one would have come if we would have just meditated. It was the
I
physical.
agree.
It was the physical.
I don't remember.
Stuff.
Did you start out with that message of being more gentle back in 1995, or did that evolve
like
over time?
if you go online, you can still, and you go look at my Warner Brothers videos from 1994, right? And you watch one of my routines, and you listen to the dialogue. I say the exact same things today. I just said the same thing to you. I say it then. So I've been trying to bring, because you got to think about it like this, like you got to agree, like anybody over 30 years old has, that's one of the beautiful things about getting older. You just see shit over and over again and the shit starts making sense. It's called wisdom, right? You can't expect young people to have it because they haven't seen things enough. And one of the things you see is the harder you are on anything, the faster you destroy it. There's not anything on earth that doesn't fall under that law. Your automobile, your washing machine, your marriage, or your body. Don't matter what it is. The harder you are on it, the faster you destroy it. So if you consider it, if you want to live as long as possible, feeling as amazing as possible, the last thing on earth you'd ever want to do is push your body hard. right? It's completely counterproductive to health and wellness. So I understood that. Now, let me just paraphrase this by saying I also still at that point had a huge ego and, was still really attached to how I looked and how much I could do. So there was an internal battle within me, right? Like I knew all this shit, but I was still programmed by my culture. My role models were like Clint Eastwood and Schwarzenegger. Mm-hmm. Right. So like here I am, like, and I'm fighting. And there was a time where I was lifting weights and doing yoga, even though I knew the weightlifting was pure vanity. Mm-hmm. I knew it, but I wasn't ready to let it go. Right.
I know, but we all had to take pictures with our shirts off and stuff.
Totally.
But see, let me stop you for a second, because first of all, I completely agree. I put myself through the asana ringer and then eventually came up with a slogan, which was gentle is the new advance. So I fully came to the same things you're talking. It's just incredibly ironic in a way, because, the phrase power yoga came to mean something very different than what you're saying. Like, I remember years later being in Japan and they didn't really even know different lineages. They just knew hot yoga and power yoga. And power yoga came to mean basically like a fast-paced vinyasa flow, like a hot, sweaty flow,
Well, I never trademarked power yoga. I'm not a businessman. I wasn't interested. I remember when I heard that Barrow was using the name, and this is like 8 years after I had been doing it, and I remember hearing that she was, and I thought she took it from me. Now, I've had conversations with her and she said she thought of it too or whatever, but, and I have no reason not to believe her. So I'll give her the benefit of the doubt that we both came up with it. But, I remember when she was using it, I was like, I don't give a shit. I mean, I'm a yogi. What do I care? I'm going to get everything that I'm supposed to get. I don't need to control all this. That's the business world that I didn't want to be a part of. Right. Mm-hmm. So I just shrugged my shoulders and let it go. Right. And I didn't care. So eventually she cared, I got a letter from a lawyer from her telling me to cease and desist.
Right.
And I just left. I'm like, oh my God, welcome to the LA business world or the New York business world.
I mean, it's an interesting point. When you opened your center in whatever it was, 1995, I guess, did you open it as a donation-based center, or how did...
I opened my center as a donation-based center because I'll give you the background. But what I was about to say is that because I didn't trademark it, power yoga became a generic term like Kleenex. Right? Kleenex is actually a company, right? But when you think of tissue to blow your nose, you call it Kleenex, It's like a generic term, right? So once everybody or many people started calling their yoga power yoga, I couldn't control what they were teaching. So the power yoga you probably got was probably not the power yoga I was teaching. Mm-mm. Even though the power yoga I was teaching was one hell of a killer workout.
Let me say that, but wait a second. So the power yoga you were teaching was giving people a killer workout, but was about being gentle and not overworking your body at the same time?
Yeah, because I have a different definition of a killer workout.
Okay.
Right, a killer workout is a workout that there's 5 pillars of fitness, right? Strength, stamina, cardio, flexibility, and balance. Mm-hmm. And I was giving people a workout that included all that, right? Mm-hmm. It was the most dynamic, it was the greatest cross training on planet Earth in one workout session. So yeah, I was giving people an amazing workout, and I was encouraging people to challenge themselves, but not force themselves. And I was mentioning to people that sometimes the biggest challenge is to get the hell out of your ego and back off, right? Yeah. Because your body's your sacred partner, and your sacred partner speaks to you in a language called sensation. And pain is your sacred partner saying, please stop, right? If you put someone else in pain and they ask you to stop and you don't stop, you go to jail. That's called rape or assault and battery, right? But most people exercise like that, right? Their body's screaming stop, but they're pushing deeper because we grew up with this mentality, no pain, no gain, which is insane. So I was trying to wake people up, but at the same time, I was trying to give people what they wanted, but spoon feed them what they needed.
See,
It was this weird dynamic, and I'm still trying to find the balance in
that's
that.
what I was just going to ask you about, because what you just said, and believe me, I'm not trying to say like I'm the same. I think a lot of teachers are, where a lot of people do come to yoga for physicality. And I don't think that that's bad. I just had someone on the other week and they talked about it like, well, maybe someone only comes because it makes them feel physically better. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that.
There's a lot wrong with that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because it seems like you said earlier in this conversation that if you go to India, and I had the same experience, yoga wasn't about asanas. It was about chanting and a certain state of mind and relationship to the divine, maybe.
Let me talk to that person that said that, okay?
Okay.
Now, I totally understand what that person means. So, in a way, I get it. And I'm not saying that person's wrong, but they're missing something huge, right? And that is, if this is only about your body, right? First of all, 90 to 95% of all physical disease is coming from mental stress. That's why the yogis in India don't even do physical yoga. Because if you really want to be healthy, you have to look at your mind state, because the disease is emanating from your mind. It's just manifesting on your body. So number one, you're missing the whole point of what you want, which is health. Number one. Number two is, if you're not doing it with mindfulness, if you're not concerned with bringing the qualities of meditation into your physicality, then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be playing out your old habit patterns in your physical practice, right? So you're actually going to be strengthening the qualities that hurt you. You're going to bring your aggressiveness. You're going to bring your forcefulness. You're going to bring your competitiveness. You're going to bring your reactiveness. If this is only about your body, then you're actually going to be strengthening the qualities that produce stress. And you don't even know it, because you're only worried about what your body's doing and not what your mind's doing within the pose. So even though I understand that, it's of course it makes people feel good. Arnold Schwarzenegger said when he's done lifting weights, he feels orgasms throughout his entire fucking body. All right. All physical exercise makes you feel good. It releases endorphins, and especially yoga, because you're stretching, which dissolves tension. So when you come out of yoga, you feel amazing. No matter, even I felt amazing after the Ashtanga yoga. But I
at
was
least for a while before the pain kicked in later.
Because I was destroying myself. I felt amazing in the near term, but in the long term, now at 50 years old, I'm paying for the trip I laid on myself when I was young. So no, if you don't do it with a certain mindfulness, you're going to harm yourself, even though you leave the class initially feeling good. Right? So, yeah, I agree with that person in the sense that I get what they're saying, but no. People feel good from lifting a lot of weight too. People feel good from running too, even though they're destroying their knees and their lower back and their hips. Right? I mean, you can walk away from an exercise feeling good and still be harming yourself.
I mean, listen, I made a whole niche career talking about what you're talking about now. And the big obstacle is that people come to yoga for fitness purposes. Part of that is that yoga was brought into the mainstream as another form of fitness. You yourself said, I was giving people what they want. I was giving them this well-rounded workout, and then also probably putting in all kinds of other things. But has that backfired? Has it backfired using the physicalities to basically be able to market it better, because people wouldn't have come, like you said, if it was just sitting and meditating?
No, because
you think that backfired on us now, and nowadays we're up against everybody thinking it's fitness.
No, not at all. First of all, it hasn't backfired at all, because number one, for the people of the fitness mentality, nothing's changed. Right? Exercise has always been about fitness, physical fitness, right? And it still is for those people. And that's fine. No judgment to them, right? But, the thing is that I had to always be honest about where I was, and whatever I was teaching was where I was, right? So like I said to you earlier, I knew it was more, but I still wanted the physical stuff. So I was doing the physical stuff and bringing in the other stuff. That's where I happened to be. And another thing, dude, the reason for the asanas are not bad. Asanas are good.
We must have got something from them, or we probably still wouldn't be doing them nowadays.
We still get something from them. See, the body requires maintenance in order to feel optimal. Asanas are the ultimate maintenance tool. There's nothing wrong with asanas. I just came back 10 minutes before I talked to you. I was teaching an asana class, right? So we need the asana as a maintenance stuff, but you have to change your mentality. The asana and the exercise is not about changing you. It's about caring for you. Don't you brush your teeth? Why do you brush your teeth? Because you can't take care of your teeth if you don't brush them. Well, how are you going to brush your hips? How are you going to brush your shoulders? How are you going to brush your pectorials, your glutes, your hamstrings, your toes? You got to touch those things. Asanas are fucking brilliant. The problem is the American mentality inside of the asana.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.